Kingdom Hearts 3 is finally upon us. After 14 years of wait since the last home console release, Disney worlds collide on Unreal Engine 4, giving us a game that's spectacular and baffling in equal measure, but nonetheless fascinating. Today then, we present you Kingdom Hearts 3, the Digital Foundry Analysis 3.1 Final Chapter Remix. Hey everybody, it's Tom here, and to join me for this one, I have none other than John Linneman.
Hey Tom, I'm here to talk with you about the 10th Kingdom Hearts game that happens to be titled Kingdom Hearts 3. And honestly, one that knows nothing can understand nothing, is all I have to say about this.
I'm a huge fan of the series. I've finished 1 and 2 back in the day on PS2. But I'm interested to know what your history is with the series and what you found playing the game. I've spent my time playing all 4 consoles to put this analysis together, but you've kind of had a look in yourself, haven't you?
Yeah, so this is kind of a fun one because you're doing this because you're a fan of the series. I am not.
Right.
I am not a fan of the series. I don't dislike it necessarily, but my history goes back to the original game, which I did purchase, and I did not enjoy the game much at all. And it has nothing to do with the story or anything like that. For me, it was simply a matter of the core design of the game. They were trying to sell you on the idea of visiting these different Disney worlds, but really, all it consisted of was a series of tiny little boxy rooms and small environments that were all bespoke and just like they felt like they had nothing to do with one another, and you're just kind of moving between a handful of small areas. But in the move to Unreal Engine 4 for this one, it kind of gives the developers a new opportunity to produce something a little different, because obviously UE4 is capable of large environments, and that's kind of what one of the things the game needed. The level design needed to improve.
That's fair to say. I came at it thinking, well, not really knowing what to expect. I don't have much experience with the handheld games in between, and I kind of glossed over those and just jumped straight to this one to see what's happened. And obviously this is the tentpole title to show off what Square Enix can do with the series on the modern day console, and with that comes a level of ambition that's perhaps closest to a game like Final Fantasy 15, and they get some things right and some things wrong, just as with Final Fantasy 15.
Mentioning Final Fantasy 15 is important here because I believe Kingdom Hearts 3, and I might be wrong, but I'm fairly certain it started out on the Luminous technology, I think it is. Yeah, it was Luminous tools or whatever that they did for Final Fantasy 15. There was obviously troubles with that in-house, so they moved development over to Unreal Engine 4. Before we continue, we should probably at least let people know the basics on things like resolution, right?
Okay, yeah, let's go for it. So, shall we start with the enhanced consoles first?
Let us do that.
Okay, so I jumped in with PS4 Pro first, PlayStation franchise traditionally, so I figured why not give that the first shot. We're getting not 1440p, it's 1296p, which I hadn't really expected. It's 2304 by 1296, so 60% on each axis, scaled down from 4K. I did hear on some forums that there was a word of 1440p here, but that's not what I've got, and it seems to be fixed resolution from the many screens I've tested so far. That's on the Mount Olympus stage right at the start. By the way, most of the tests here will be trying to avoid spoilers. We basically took the first Mount Olympus level and like the first gummy ship stage to get to the next area. So if you're worried about that, don't be. It's fairly basic stuff.
Yes, we've learned somewhat at least. So,
Yeah.
No spoilers here.
And I know people are very sensitive when it comes to this series, especially about that sort of stuff. So I respect that. But yes, 1296p on Pro. And then I moved over to Xbox One X. And definitely it's an upgrade. You are getting 2560 by 1440 there, which does stand out. And yeah, that's pretty much the way it worked out. What about the base consoles then?
We discovered then that the base PS4 gives us a 1600 by 900 image, while the old base Xbox One, as we've often seen with Unreal Engine 4 games, drops all the way down to 720p, just like Ace Combat 7 recently. And in all 4 cases, from what I can see, anti-aliasing is not great.
It depends definitely on the console. I think the more pixels it's got to work with, the better. It really stood out on base Xbox One though, didn't it? I mean, it's...
Yeah, it's the image quality is not very good on the base. This is one of those games, naturally, as you expect with texture filtering. As you lower the resolution, obviously that's going to change the quality of that. The blurry texture filtering and the somewhat blurry yet pixelated look at the lower end consoles here, it's not great, and it does kind of spoil the overall visual quality at points.
Yep. That's one of the main visual differences I've seen besides res. Yeah, definitely an isotropic filtering on the ground. Other than that, this comparison is fairly straightforward. What you have otherwise is a difference in ambient occlusion, so like the shade underneath characters' feet, as you look into the distance, you get more of a dithered effect on the floor on PS4 and Xbox One. It's especially worse on base Xbox One, kind of tolerable on PS4, and pretty much non-existent on Pro and X. I think they're pretty much fine in that respect. Yeah, that's pretty much how they all compare when it comes to the base visuals. A huge drop-off in resolution for Xbox One, and if you're looking for the most pristine image possible, it's the X kind of inevitably.
But hey, as we'll get to later, this battle is far from over. There's some interesting results coming up. But first, I think, Tom, you wanted to discuss another aspect of the game.
I think you kind of pioneered this, the format of what works and what doesn't with this game, in terms of the general visual style and the way it plays, as a modern game. Because I played this, and all the way through, I had this kind of phrase, the last Guardianitis. It's got the same symptoms of a game that's really well crafted for a period of time that's kind of passed, because they started the project a long time ago and built on the technology and iterated and improved it on that sort of baseline. So mechanically, it does feel a little bit dated, but visually it's lacquered with these gorgeous visuals in spots and some odd points as well if you go into it later on. The first level is an amazing vertical slice just to show off the technology. You got some beautiful shaded work. I love the mountain area, the green grass, the waterfalls, even the reflections look great too. I don't know if we've got screen space reflections there, but it's definitely a real eye-catching opener. But that's not to say everything in there looks amazing, and this is the part that doesn't work. I mean, the enemies are, there's this one sand enemy which kind of sprouts from the ground, and the shaded work on that is really not what I'd expect from a PS4 title. It just sticks out quite badly. So it's a real mixed bag, but on the whole I do love the aesthetic. They've got this wonderful section towards the end. It really strikes home what Kingdom Hearts is about. Sora's running up this mountainside, lightning rain striking against it, you've got this epic choral music, and you get to the top and then you see Donald Duck and you're like, okay, right, that's a Kingdom Hearts title then.
Yeah, so on the more negative side there, you're right. The introduction level does a nice job of showcasing what the engine can do. Namely, unlike those PS2 games, it's no longer broken up into a bunch of unique chunks. It's more like it's a continuous level, one that's sort of sprawled out before the player, and you kind of move from area to area seamlessly, but there are some strange choices there in regards to the way it plays. Like, there's these moments where you hop on Goofy's shield and you have to ride through these flames, and the collision there is strange, and the animation feels a little jerky, and it's a poorly thought out sequence. And also, I feel like the general animation, the feeling of movement, and just flinging yourself around the screen, again, compared to Final Fantasy 15, it's kind of a huge step back. I just don't think that it nailed that look, and that goes hand in hand with one of my biggest visual complaints, and I know plenty of people may disagree here, but the game needs object motion blur during gameplay. They use it during the cutscenes and it looks incredible, like it really does give it that pre-rendered look, but they disable that during gameplay, and as a result, and with the image quality flaws, it ends up just looking a little bit herky-jerky at points.
Another thing I definitely picked up on was, well, as a positive, it's the field of view.
Yes.
It really feels like they cranked that all the way up. That makes a big difference to gameplay, because on the PS2 games you had a very limited view that disabled you from really seeing all the enemies around you, and especially the environments being as vertical as they are. It does make a huge impact on reading the area and knowing where to go next.
The overall presentation is definitely something I'd put in the win category. where the quality of the cutscenes it's impressive. Like the character models are extremely nicely detailed. They really go deep on the sort of the materials. So like there's plenty of close-up camera shots that show mesh material on certain clothing items, or like, you know, the different cloths, and you get a close look up at the skin and the hair. And there's still that cartoony vibe to it, but somehow it has like it feels a little bit more realistic. And I really think that Unreal's and the artists' work here on the materials is really tremendous. There's points where it starts to resemble a CGI movie. Now, obviously, you know, in terms of the lighting happening, it's not going to really technically be on par with that, but it's convincing, and that part did impress me quite a bit.
It's a very difficult line to straddle, isn't it? Because you've got these worlds which are traditionally hand animated, especially, you know, Goofy, Donald Duck, Mickey Mouse, and then, as you say, you know, they've gone for this very CGI look, and it's kind of awesome to see, you know, these characters with a proper lighting model affecting materials on them. So it reminds me a little bit of a Smash Bros. Ultimate, actually, because they have to fix on a point to standardize everything.
And the issue there then for me is that when what you see during gameplay is not really a match for those cutscenes. It really feels a little bit disjointed, more so than, again, like Final Fantasy 15, where it felt much more comparable. There's a lot of elements like this, I think, in the what works, what doesn't, and it's a little bit scattered, I suppose, because we're talking about Kingdom Hearts, and we could just talk about any random thing and it would be fitting here, because that's just that's just the nature of Kingdom Hearts. But I think a lot of people here want to talk about performance, and we probably should move over to that and discuss that.
Right. This is an odd part of the story, I think, because PS4 Pro was the first version I jumped into, and right away I was very disappointed with just the unlocked performance. It's you get two options in the game itself. There's a default option, and then there's the stable option.
Which is a lie.
Which is it is a lie. Well, the stable option is a 30 FPS cap. The problem? Well, the frame pacing. It doesn't actually have an even frame pacing, so it feels really erratic anyway. And just to jump ahead a little bit, this is the way it goes for every console, so it doesn't matter whether you play an Xbox One or PS4. This will be an unevenly frame-paced game if you switch that mode on. And so, essentially, it's broken. They need to sort that.
And I think it needs to be highlighted just how bad the frame pacing is for this title. We've seen this kind of thing plenty of times before. Games like Bloodborne are always brought up in this regard. But Kingdom Hearts 3, there's something seriously wrong with the way they've implemented the frame rate cap, and it just doesn't work properly, and it looks really jerky in motion. It's not smooth, to the point where even people that typically I find aren't that interested or talk about frame rate that often, they're picking up on that, being like, wow, this really doesn't look very smooth at all. And so without motion blur and with the severe frame pacing issues, I think it's a terrible option. Which brings us then to the default frame rate, which again, in most cases, I don't think it's good enough either.
No, so running unlocked, I think the idea was right. This game really benefits from being 60 FPS, at least having that as the top target. And I'd recommend just leaving it unlocked compared to the 30 FPS cap.
Yeah,
just
agreed.
go for it, whatever. I guess the base consoles first. So PS4 and Xbox One. Let's go for PS4 first. This goes anything between 30 to 60 FPS. It is what it is. There's no motion blur to hide it, which might have helped full screen motion blur of some kind to smooth it over a little bit. It's a bit of a shame. Now, I did look over to the Xbox One and Pro, and I found that in select scenes like that bit where you're riding on Goofy's shield through the fire, I thought that was a great benchmark because it gives you loads of alpha. It turns out in that scene, Pro comes out worst with PS4 and then Xbox One on top.
Are we talking Xbox One base or Xbox One X here?
Yeah, so base Xbox One has the better performance compared to both PS4 consoles.
Wow.
In that select matching scene. Now, all the gameplay from there on just kind of gets muddled in kind of the frenzy of combat, which, you can't really sync up properly. Generally they're all between 40 to 50 FPS line, but as a kind of indicator, it just shows Pro isn't really making full use of the hardware to prioritize the frame rate, which perhaps should have been the idea. So the next one up, obviously, Xbox One X with the 1440p native res actually comes out with the best performance as well. So it pretty much gets away with about say 50 to 60 FPS in most battles in the first world, which is pretty good going, I think. So there's a bit of a twist to this though.
Yeah, so basically if you're running on the PlayStation 4 Pro and you set your console to 1080p output and you disable super sampling and you start it up, it will run at 1080p instead of the 1296p I think it was. So you're losing some resolution. Not that much actually, but you're losing some resolution. But the trade-off is that the average performance level kind of shoots up and manages to hit 60 FPS a good chunk of the time all of a sudden.
Yeah, and I think the crucial bit there is it's better than Xbox One X by default. There is a margin where in matching scenes like that fire test again, riding on the shield, you're going to get a better frame rate. It sticks to 60 FPS much closer. It's not perfect. 50 to 60 FPS is the range when it's really pushed. And who knows, there may be cases where the game really pushes the engine later on. But as a sign of how things will play out, clearly 1080p on PS4 Pro is the way forward. It's how I'm playing it now, and I'm having the most fun this way.
If you have the choice, PS4 Pro 1080p is the way to play the game. It's just flat out the smoothest way to experience it, and you're getting close to 60 FPS most of the time. The only exception might be if you're running a FreeSync display and it works, then it's possible that the Xbox One X version will actually look the smoothest of all while providing the best image quality. So that's kind of where those two are at. And then after that, it looks like the Pro in its, I hate saying 4K mode because it's not really, but
no,
you know what I mean.
Really.
The higher resolution mode, it's below both of those, so it's not quite stable enough. It's really difficult to get a stable frame rate in this game. You can't get a locked 30 because of the frame pacing issues, and getting to a locked 60 it's almost possible in the Pro 1080p, but just barely, and it's not completely consistent. So, and I should note, by the way, that all the cutscenes run at 30 frames per second with really nice motion blur, but they too can exhibit some frame pacing issues.
It does make sense those cutscenes are locked 30, given
Sure.
depth of field, and that motion blur is really excellent, but they can't have been cheap on the GPUs these consoles are carrying. So it does make sense to lock 30, but ultimately the gameplay needs to be addressed in some way. Now, what I think is this game needs to be given a 1080p option on Pro and X alongside that stable mode. Just because, if you're an X owner, you don't have that same option, essentially, because if you have 1080p output selected, you're going to automatically get a super sampling from 1440p. So that's kind of off the cards. And for the Pro side, really you shouldn't be expected to wade through the PS4 settings menus to sort that out for yourself. It should be embedded in the game. So I think that's a pretty good way to kind of tie things up then. If we look at Final Fantasy XV's fate as it went on with the patches and updates, we did see it get gradually better and more refined, and they reacted to the problems it had at launch. In terms of the technical side, definitely there's scope for sort of patchwork akin to what Final Fantasy XV had post-launch. So there is hope for this game, and I'm really hoping they do make the most of that. Right, so that'll do it for today. Thanks so much for joining me, John.
No problem, Tom.
And if you do enjoy or appreciate the work we do at Digital Foundry, don't forget to like or subscribe to our channel. And also, we have this video on our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net if you want the original source file. If you want to get in touch with me or John directly, just use Twitter. But for now, thanks for watching.